Thank you everybody for turning up. I know how pressured everybody is with their time, so really glad you managed to make some time to come and listen to this evening's talk. So I'll just crack on with introductions, so we've got quite a lot to get through, which I guess is this one. So this is me. I am a visiting professor. I am and I have been a visiting professor for the last 7 years at IEDE. And those are my professional qualifications there. And why am I standing here tonight? Well, I'm here because I've got a 35-year-long career in MEP engineering. And I think, whilst I'm not the best by a long, long way, I certainly have a bit of wisdom. And I think it's our responsibility to pass that on to you lot. So really the whole reason for this series of talks is to actually try and pass as much of our learning to the next generation, to make the next generation as good as they can be, as quickly as they can be, to deal with all the problems and challenges you have to face in your career. So that's really the backdrop for the set of talks. Of course, my world, back in 1984 when I graduated, before many of you were born, I was lucky enough to be on a course like you, where I learned engineering, architecture, and civil engineering at the same time. So I understood from a very early age the benefit of learning a broad engineering design background and understanding how architects work, understanding how structural engineers work, and all those sort of things, because that really does set you up for a really good rapid progression in your working. The role that I joined back in 1984 was much slower than I didn't know that, and I don't think I even knew what carbon was when I graduated back in 1984. I've obviously picked up a lot along my way, but your career, your world, is going to be dominated by carbon and by dealing with some massive problems that you're probably all aware of, like climate change and the like. And those issues will be instrumental in your career. And your career will be very challenging because there are a lot of problems to overcome. But I certainly don't want to put you off, far from that. I have got a lot out of my career. I've really enjoyed it. Almost every single day that I've come to work, I've enjoyed it. And I can say that I'd like to think you can do that as well. So how can my wisdom help you to be as effective as quickly as possible? Because we need you, the world needs you to be as effective as quickly as possible. But of course it's not just my wisdom, I've got some wisdom, but there is an awful lot of wisdom out there, people like me, in lots of the individual subsets of the construction industry, lots of the disciplines that come together to make the construction industry what it is, like architects, clients, engineers. So as I say, the driving force behind this series of talks is to get as much of that wisdom from as wide-ranging disciplines as possible here delivered for you to learn from. So it's a monthly set of talks throughout this academic year and into next year. The next talk is going to be delivered by Emma Maloney, who runs the existing building decarbonisation optimisation piece of Hawley Consulting Engineers, and the one after that is Joe Thornton, who is a founding director at CAST, who are probably one of, if not the leading QSPM firm, project managing firm in London, and he's coming over to talk as well, and that's in May. Emma is in April. So these talks are about passing wisdom to you. We're all on your side. I mean, this might seem slightly strange to you. None of us are doing this for money. We're just doing it because we're passionate about the industry. So we're here to help you. So that's really what this is all about. So gladly, I'm not going to be talking. So the two people today are going to be talking to you are Oliver Milton and Shikha Bharadwaj from Hawkins Brown. They are, in their own way, both leading front-line practitioners in the real world that is very busy and very complex and very demanding and very challenging and very rewarding. And they're going to be talking to you about that. Hawkins Brown are one of the leading, if not the leading, architectural firms in London at the moment. You'll probably have seen many of their buildings, and I know Oliver's going to talk about that in a minute. I've known Oliver for 25 years, and we probably like each other as much now as we did 25 years ago. So that says something. I think we've got something in common. But interestingly, both Oliver and Shikha have had different routes into their profession, and they are doing different jobs. So in a way, you're getting two talks for the price of one tonight. We hope to be talking for about 45 minutes, probably 45 minutes. Both Shikha and Oliver have a lot of wisdom to offer. So if I can urge you to sort of pay attention and sort of be interested in what they're talking about, it will be interesting. And we're happy to take questions at any stage. So if any of us say things you don't understand, or you've got a follow-up question around that, then please put your hand up and I'll interrupt either of the speakers and we'll take that question. But we've also got plenty of time at the end for questions and a discussion, depending on what comes up. So that's it. I've done my bit. I'll hand over firstly to Oliver.
Thank you very much, Ian. Good evening. Thanks very much for having us. So we were just going to do a quick introduction to our careers to date, and as Ian said, they have been quite varied, different ways into the profession. So I'm Oliver, as Ian said, managing partner of Hawkins Brown. That is a role I've been doing for about 5 years, and I've been a partner of Hawkins Brown for about 15 years, I think. So a lot of my work as managing partner is obviously in the kind of central managing of the practice. But I do try very hard to stay involved in projects, which is what I trained to become an architect to do. If you take my career back 30 years, I trained in Manchester at the Manchester School of Architecture for both my part 1 and my part 2. I stayed in Manchester and did my part 1 year out, which is the project from 1996 on the screen. It was a McDonald's and a Asda petrol filling station. So comically crap architecture, but actually a really, really good learning experience. That the McDonald's, which is sort of in the background, it looks like every other McDonald's, but was designed from scratch without a single computer being involved, I might add, back in 1996, to look like all the other McDonald's, and that's how they were done back then. Obviously now they are done from a kit of parts and assembled very quickly. It was a really good experience. Sadly, the practice that I worked for went into administration just last week. Nothing to do with my work on the McDonald's, I hasten to add. From there, I came to London and I worked for a small practice called Dannett Johnson doing the refurbishment of the Royal Naval College for the University of Greenwich, which was a fascinating project. Grade 1 listed buildings, all of them scheduled national monuments designed by the likes of Hawksmoor and Wren. Little known fact about the Royal Naval College, in the back corner in this building here, when the Royal Navy were using it, they had a nuclear reactor in there, and told nobody that they had done it. So when we were working on that project, we had to decommission that building and clean it up from all the nuclear material in there, which involved excavating, down about 15 metres below that Grade 1 listed building to get rid of all the soil that was, and this is a reactor that was put in there in the 1950s, so you can imagine what that was like. From there, I joined Hawkins Brown in 2001, and my first project at Hawkins Brown is the image just to the right there, 2001, and was about a £5 million project for Anglia Ruskin University. And on the far-hand side is one of my current projects, which is Cambridge Children's Hospital. I'm going to talk a bit more about that later, and that's a £350 million project. So a huge amount of progression and lessons to my career, from those humble beginnings with the McDonald's through to the Cambridge Children's Hospital. I'm going to let Shikha introduce herself.
Hi everyone, thanks for coming to listen to our talk. So my name is Shikha Bharadwaj. I'm a lead sustainability designer at Hawkins Brown. And to take you through my journey, I studied architecture back in India. And then I came to the IEDE School of Architecture in 2012 to do a master's in housing and urbanism. And I got even more interested in sustainability. I think I was always interested. And then I didn't want to do another master's because it was really expensive. So I joined a company called Chapman BDSP as their graduate environmental consultant. And there I was really lucky because I landed a place where the consultants, the designers, and my leads were actually approaching sustainability from a design aspect and not like a checkbox exercise and not so heavily driven by compliance. So it was a really good balance. And I also got the opportunity to work with renowned architects, the names that I had only heard in India, and that was the dream of, I think, every architecture student in India to sort of work with one of them. And I got lucky to work with quite a handful, like Foster's, Rogers, Grafton's, Calatrava, quite a bunch. And at that consultancy, I also sort of, somehow was at the right place at the right time, worked at different scales of the projects, from a small scale to a building to the tallest tower the Calatrava was building at the time in Dubai, to the longest convention center that's in Shenzhen by Willow and Peace 3, which I got the opportunity to then present for SIPSI BSG Awards in 2018, and then secured the first position, which was really exciting because we were competing against big names like Arab. And from there, I moved to urban systems design, where I got another wonderful opportunity of working on an airport in India, in Noida, very close to the city I come from, and is meant to be the first net zero carbon airport in India. And it was very exciting because it was so close to the culture that I'm so aware of, and the context, and I was so aware of the climatic issues that we were able to resolve some through the design strategies and through the passive design. It was a key driver in reducing the energy consumption of the building. And from there, 3 years ago, I decided to move to Hawkins Brown because I wanted to work with an architectural practice as the in-house sustainability designer. And then you might ask why I chose Hawkins Brown, because they are, and they were as well 3 years ago, sort of ahead of the curve when it comes to architectural practices embedding or taking sustainability seriously. So that was what attracted me towards Hawkins Brown. And here I sort of use the experience I've had for last 8 years in working on different projects, on different scales, different skill set, to sort of map out or carve out the design approaches that we apply on the projects. And sustainability is sort of used as part of the DNA of the design thinking and not an add-on. And I'll talk about some of those in my slides. Thanks.
Very good, thank you. Okay, so what we're going to do today is do a quick introduction to the practice, super quick. Then I'm going to talk about 5 key lessons that I think might be helpful to you in your careers. I'm going to talk as an architect, but I'm going to try and apply some engineering lessons to the projects I've worked on. And then Shikha is going to take you through how we approach sustainability at Hawkins Brown. So on Hawkins Brown, very quickly, this is us at our away day last summer. We are 250 people, usually happy, as you can see on that picture, not always. We are an employee-owned business, and we are a B Corp. Which is a kind of, I don't know if you're aware of B Corp, but it's a governance system around the way in which the companies that choose to become B Corps are managed in terms of their sustainability, the way they treat their employees and all the rest of it. So that probably tells you quite a lot about the kind of company that we are. We've got most of us in London, but we also have studios in Manchester, Edinburgh, Dublin and Toronto. And we work across most sectors of architecture and design. So lots of work in the kind of cultural, civics and community area, a lot of work with education and research. That's where I've worked with Ian extensively in the past in universities. Healthcare, things like Cambridge Children's Hospital. We have an interior design studio in the practice. A lot of residential projects, and at the moment the Resi world we were talking before the start here is really, really busy. So that's kind of beginning to dominate our practice a little bit more than we'd like it to, and as for everybody else as well. Workplace, across a broad range of different types of industry, and then urban design and master planning as a separate studio, and infrastructure. We were the architects for 3 other Crossrail stations, for example. So a really, really broad, wide mix of different types of projects running through the practice. What I should say is we have also designed, and I have not included them in the talk, maybe I should have done, but we've designed 3 buildings for UCL. 22 Gordon Street for the Bartlett, here East, which I know you guys are using, and currently on site the Dementia Research Institute on Gray's Inn Road. So we are on the UCL framework and doing various bits and pieces there as well. As well as being architects, we, and Shikha is part of our sustainability team, for example, but we have an increasing range of additional consultancies within the practice, which is very typical of a large-scale practice like ours. And probably even only 8 or 10 years ago, we were purely architects and interior designers, and all of the new stuff that you see there has kind of been added on in more recent years, which is the trend in large practices, and the complexity of the construction process means that having expertise in a lot of these additional areas of design is super helpful to us and needed by our clients. So that kind of specialism and increased technical complexity of projects is leading us to have more and more wide-ranging offer. And then the last slide on us is, just to say that our approach is very holistic. So we are often working with clients at the very beginning, giving them strategic advice on whether they even need to do a project, all the way through the design process and through the construction process. We are passionate about building what we design, which is maybe a funny thing to say, but there are lots of architects who don't want to do that anymore because of the challenges and risks that building projects now carries. But we think you can't work at the beginning of a project if you haven't got the experience of seeing things through. So we will continue to always do that. And we also work with our clients post-occupation, sometimes for many, many years, to help them optimize and get the best out of the buildings, which are complicated things that they need help in understanding how to use best. So these are the 5 lessons that I wanted to talk to you about today. Ian, when he asked us to give this talk, said, what if you were being given advice very early stage in your career, what would you want to know about? And these are the things that I think are maybe helpful to understand and to know about. They relate to how you might work in the future. They relate to how you might behave on projects and within working practices. They certainly cover some of the ways in which you might develop solutions in your work, and obviously lots of them overlap with each other. Rather than talk to them in abstract, I'm going to try and illustrate some of these points with some real-world examples of Hawkins Brown's work. As Ian said, interrupt us as we go. More than happily take questions as we go along. It's better that, I think, than trying to come back at the end. So the first example is Freeman's Pool. This is a really beautiful project completed about 10 years ago. It's super simple, but it is a very heavily serviced building. But it's services that you don't see anywhere. And the design would not have been successful if you had seen the services in this building. And we worked with engineers who really understood that and were super proactive in coming to us really early on with ideas of how you could ventilate this space and service this space from below the ground and from the sides and without seeing any of those services. You don't even see the lights in this picture. Obviously there are lights, they're on the side, just above the windows, but they are fully integrated into the architecture. So this is a good example where an engineer really got under the skin of the building and designed really elegant engineering solutions to that building and took as much pride in the design as we did. And I think the engineering here is as much as part of the success as the architecture. Very similar story on the structure for this building. So you can see on the right-hand side there the glulam beams and columns that hold this thing up. Everything on the structure here was built in just 8 days. And I think, again, the collaboration effort here was absolutely fundamental. Buildings making buildings is a team sport. There are many individual disciplines contributing to the success of a project always. And in this case, it was a really fantastic collaboration between us as the architects, but also the engineers, the contractors, and actually quite a lot of specialists who were working on this project as well, everybody playing their part. And I think the collaboration is such an important component to the way in which the construction sector sees successes in their projects. Full change in scale. This is Cambridge Children's Hospital. It's one of our current projects. It's just being tendered at the moment to contractors to build it. It is, as I said, £350 million worth, about 35,000 square metres, so it's a big project. It's a really fascinating challenge. This will be the first hospital in the UK that combines physical and mental health in a single building and with a single care pathway for those patients within the building. So to do this, we've had a really, really close collaboration with the clinicians, and we've developed with them a combined model of care. And I think to do that, you have to have, I said staying curious here, you have to be really curious about the buildings that you're designing. You've got to want to get under the skin of them and understand them and have a real interest in them and develop solutions for them. Facade design here is really important. It's a complex building. I've used a video here because as you look along the elevation obliquely, you can see the colours much more intensely than you can when you look at it straight on. It's a facade that's got to deal with a huge number of technical requirements, The middle part of this building, the darkest stripe, is an entire floor, interstitial floor of servicing that goes up, serves up and down to the building, elements of the inside parts of the hospital. We've got to get daylight through the facade, we've got to provide shading, we've got to get ventilation through the facade, and it's all got to be designed in a way which is entirely anti-ligature safe for the patients within it. And really importantly, it has to be a beautiful solution that talks about being a children's hospital and is a welcoming, not frightening place for children to come to. All of that facade design is modular. It's made up of a number of very simple repeating elements that are combined in a way that brings the interest and the variation to the elevation. It's all manufactured off-site. And we work really hard with engineers again, with facade specialists to ensure that the facade delivers a really good passive solution to solar gain within that design. So they've got vertical fins and chamfered elevation components which are all optimised for the different elevations of the building to make sure we get absolutely the best solution. Dropping down the scale again, this is St Mary's Academy. I think this is a two-form entry primary school for the DFE. It's up in Derby. It's a DFE Pathfinder. It's completed last year. So they're interested. They commissioned us to design a school which was net zero in operation, ultra low embodied carbon in construction, all manufactured off-site. And that has been achieved here by making almost everything out of timber. The canopy in the foreground obviously is steel, but all of the built components are timber. All of the walls and floors were constructed off-site. Super simple, so I say keeping things simple. There's such a trend for things to get too complicated in our industry. A lot of engineers like to make things very complicated. Not all of them.
But architects do as well, though.
True. Yes, but I think, it's often the case, and I'm about to show you a really complex building next, but it's often the case that the simple solutions are the best ones. So this building is a good example of that. There's the light shelf above the windows you can see, and that's doing a huge amount of work to bring bounce light deep into the space, but it's also meaning that you can naturally ventilate this building throughout the year. The shelf stops cold air being dumped on the kids in the classroom. So it's got a nat vent solution that runs throughout the year. Windows are just very simply controlled with CO2 monitor. No ceilings, no floor finishes, it's just concrete on the floor, all to keep the embodied carbon down. And the output of this, it's been open for 1 year, it has proven to be net zero carbon in operation. It's 390 kilograms per metre squared, which compared to the RIBA target of 2030 target of 540 is obviously really good. So it's proven to be really successful and has exceeded the target set for it by the DFE.
Oliver, can I ask if you are staying involved in that post-completion to monitor carbon in use?
Yes. So those figures I just gave you are after the first year.
Okay. And then after that?
After that, we're going to design a secondary school for them along the same principles.
Right.
So this is the first of two, hopefully. So we're now working. Yeah. Okay. So from saying keep things simple, I'm now going to present the last one for me, a very complicated building. A project I work with Ian on and the team at Hawley. It's a good example where a lot of the behaviours I said come together in a single project. It's for the University of Oxford. It's a physics research building. In fact, all of the projects I've presented are the completed projects are national RIBA award winners, except for the McDonald's. It's a very beautiful solution to a very complex problem. The brief for this project was fascinating. It was split into, on the one hand, a very old-fashioned requirement for a collaborative office and working space for theoretical physicists who genuinely still all work around blackboards and genuinely create equations like the one on the screen here, which is it's almost like their language, it's their way of communicating. And then combined with that, a brief for essentially the most technically advanced experimental physics laboratories ever built, and they are, and still are, I think, meet that brief. All of this right in the centre of Oxford. So you saw in that first photo, we're next to Keble College, which is Grade 1 listed, a number of other Grade 1 listed buildings and landscapes in the immediate vicinity of this project. And that has led us to create a building which is a bit like it's often referred to as an iceberg. It goes down as far as it goes up. 5 floors above ground of theoretical physics collaborative office accommodation, and 5 floors below ground of experimental physics laboratories. Only 2 of those floors are occupied. Above and between those floors and below are interstitial servicing floors that provide all of the air and vibration isolation for the laboratories to function. So it's a really unique and extremely challenging, but also extremely interesting and rewarding project. The upstairs bit is relatively simple, I guess. So here are the blackboards. We've got a donut of offices, essentially, organised around the perimeter, and then this collaborative atrium in the centre of the plan. Within that atrium, there are these platforms, which are on the half landing level, so you are always only half a floor away from the offices around the perimeter, so the visibility across the building is maximised as much as possible. And the way that they work is that they are producing you can see the writing on the blackboard there, the equations, and people are able to see what's happening and then go and contribute to that discussion. They have an incredibly collaborative working method in understanding the challenges and problems they're looking at in physics. Downstairs, an environment which is completely different, and there was part of the brief was to think as much about how we can connect these spaces as possible, and the people who are doing their experiments downstairs are coming up to the upper part of the building. The downstairs environment isn't really designed for people, bizarrely. It has a number of very, very high-performing laboratories, and it is often the case that in order to achieve the performance, the people cannot be in the room when the experiment's running because the people impact their heat and their movement impacts on the experiment itself. Quite small laboratories, packed into the plan, and then this odd shape bit over here is where all the plant is, which is underneath a bit of landscape outside the building, in a separate structure from the main building, again to help isolate from the vibration point of view. So it's a good example where all of the sort of attributes I described at the beginning are needed to deliver this kind of building. On the photos on this slide are some of the existing experiments set up in the original buildings that we were replacing. And you can see from the photo, we haven't got great photos of the original spaces, but they are a real mess, super techy, really complex. What a lot of the scientists are doing, I can't explain this to you, I don't understand it, but what I do know is what they're doing is they are looking at things at a very, very minute scale. So they are trying to look at things that are essentially 100,000 times thinner than a human hair. And to do that, you need to have an extremely highly controlled environment. For us to achieve that, this is, again, from a collaboration point of view, and from a kind of staying curious point of view, we had to work really hard to understand that and understand how they were going to work and how we were going to help them work in that way, and then collaborate across the team, engineers, architects, scientists themselves, absolutely fundamental to the success of this project, and also the contracting team and all of the subcontractors that came with them. I think just in terms of vibration, I'm not going to go into the technical details of this, but these VC coefficients are vibration coefficients, and you can see at the top here, you've got things like operating theatres right up here. So spaces that are still quite technically demanding. What we were doing is trying to design spaces that were VCM right down the bottom here, and they have not been built previously anywhere in the world, and there are some being built now, but at the time it was right out there. And then on the right-hand side, the temperature and humidity control also right out there in terms of the levels that we were trying to achieve. To do that, actually Hawley, to a great degree, we're working with the contractors to understand how you can achieve those kind of environments within the kind of, at the point of the experiment, and we were creating mock-ups in a warehouse outside of Oxford, working through various different arrangements, again, with the full team, to try and achieve the level of sophistication that we needed to. it's very unusual to do this on a project, to kind of take it to this level of examination, but it was needed to get it to where we needed to get to. That was more on the temperature control side. On the vibration side, again, if you're looking at things that are 100 times thinner than 100,000 times thinner than a human hair, you need the space that you're working in to be very, very still. And that is a very complex engineering challenge, which is achieved through a very layered approach here. So the overall structure of the building is really high performing. The lab itself is isolated from that structure. The central part of the floor is isolated from the rest of that lab. All of the vibration generating equipment is outside of the space. People are outside of the space when the experiment is running. A few photos on this page of what some of this looks like in reality. So you can see on the left the laboratory, which is within this bit, is kind of separate from the rest of the building, and there's kind of movement joints everywhere. You see the slab in the middle of the lab, which is the bit that's isolated. On the right-hand side is the concrete that sits below that, with it, sitting on dampers. Even the architects don't normally take pictures of the engineering services in buildings, but we did on this project, because you get amazing things like all of the pipes which have got air or liquid moving through them that could create vibration are mounted on spring dampers. So it's an extraordinary building in that regard. And the servicing of it, the engineering of it, is as important to the success, probably in this case, more important to the success than the architecture. So it's another great example where to achieve complexity, in this case, you really have to fulfill all of the attributes on the left-hand side of the slide. And the amazing thing is you have to work all of this through before you really start building it, because in the case of this building, this is the basement being excavated. It's 5 stories down, but you can see on the right-hand side here all of those keel slabs. We had to understand exactly how they were going to work from the very beginning, because they're the first things to go into the building before anything is built around it. So I think that's my last slide, really. I think, in terms of those lessons that I wanted to talk about, I think being proactive, seeking out issues, don't wait for them to arrive. If you want to really succeed in your careers, it's the proactive people that are going to get furthest ahead. Collaboration I've talked about a lot. Nothing in this building or any of the buildings I've talked about has happened without there being great collaboration between multiple disciplines. And the industry is getting more complex. As I said, Hawkins Brown used to be architects. Now we've got probably 10 different disciplines within the practice doing various things, all collaborating together to get their heads around the complexity. And if you are collaborating, do it face-to-face, not online, obviously. Taking pride, I think it's so important to be passionate about what you're doing, going beyond just the base level. It's the best way to get results, without doubt. It's also the best way to progress in your individual careers. Staying curious. I think I've been lucky to work on interesting projects that have been very varied. That helps you stay curious, because you're always learning and bringing lessons, or needing to learn lessons on the projects you're working on. But when you get to the point where you're bringing kind of preconceived ideas from elsewhere and it's just kind of churning over and over again, then it becomes boring. And as I said, keeping things simple can be tricky, and in the case of the Beecroft building is not really appropriate. But I think even presenting in a simple, clear way and trying to explain ideas very simply is a really useful skill for people to have in their careers. That's me. I'm going to hand over to Shikha. Do you want me to do these buttons, or are you going to stay sitting?
No, I'll try. If I get tired, I'll come sit. Thank you. Okay.
Any questions for Oliver before we start the next bit, or do you want to save them all up until the end?
Are you changing from here?
Spacebar.
Spacebar. No questions?
Right, okay.
All right. Let's talk about sustainability. So I hope that everybody in the room agrees that climate change is for real. If not, you can leave and save your next 10 minutes. But I hope we understand the urgency, and Oliver spoke about carbon, and Ian spoke about carbon in their introduction. And then I think it's really important to understand that we've really not been good. We have exhausted our resources. We have emitted excessive amount of embodied carbon emissions into the environment, which has threatened the existence of our planet. And sadly, the pressure actually is going to be on the next generations. So the question is there any opportunity left to actually be good ancestors? We know the problem, and we also have the solutions, but where do we start? For that, I always say it's important to take a step back and try to understand what is that we are trying to protect, or what is that we are trying to create. And the answer sort of lies in understanding the environments, it's the natural environment, it's the human and the built environment. And in a way, the challenge of each project is how you actually achieve harmony between the three when you're working on even a small scale or a large scale master plan. And then sustainability in general has a very important and a key role to play. But it needs to be approached in a very systematic way so that it becomes part of the DNA, because when it's more embedded, it's more effective. And then I will also go through some of the examples on how we have done that on a project at Hawkins Brown. So this is one of the methodology or approach that I sort of learned very early on at Chapman VDSB, and like we have been using it for almost 11 years to investigate sites using the 3 C's, which is climate, culture, and context. So when you look at the climate, it sort of gives you clues on how you should be designing your buildings and how you should be designing your external spaces. Culture is understanding the relationship of people with those spaces that you will be designing. And then context is understanding what the challenges are on the site, what's happening around your site. Is there a flooding issue, for example? Is there the air quality? What's the density? What your site actually needs to offer back to the city? And once you get the understanding of these three, it gives you a very good holistic approach on how you can address your projects. And then at Hawkins Brown, that's like step number 1 that we sort of follow. And then once you have a better understanding of the challenges and the opportunities, like I mentioned, we use this 3-step approach, which is discover, explore, and deliver. So discover is about getting to know your client. Go through their brief, see if there are any gaps. And as a consultant or as a designer, that's the opportunity or the window of opportunity when you can actually challenge the brief. And you must, if there are any gaps and you think that sustainability is lacking behind or is woolly or the KPIs are not very, very clear, it's really important to sort of educate the client and take them through that journey. And then once the brief is set and is clear and is locked, it's important to sort of start exploring what the potential scenarios are, what the design options could be. And here, collaboration with the rest of the consultants is really, really key. And then lastly is deliver, which is to ensure that once you have a preferred solution, how do you make sure that you monitor it, you track it, and then you deliver it through construction and procurement routes. So discover, I would just say, one of the key challenges or the aim is to identify what the key priorities are and what's the viability of those priorities, because you can't achieve everything, like every project can't achieve everything on every site. It always has its own challenges. The client has its own vision, so you need to find a balance. But it's really, really important to know what the focus is and then make sure that that gets delivered. So this is one of the examples of how we did that on innovation building with University of Glasgow. So the challenge here really was, or is, that the client has a very fixed budget to a certain stage, to a certain design stage, and then they need to attract investors for the funding to complete the building and then to operate it as well. Which means that at the moment when university is making decisions, they need to make sure that they are designing the building for the future so that it attracts interesting tenants and interesting investors, because in current climate, investors have started to ask for the sustainability KPIs and the metrics. So making sure that your building is able to do that was one of the key challenges. And then how did we come across or approached it? We had sustainability visioning with the University of Glasgow, like the whole team. And then as an outcome of that workshop, we identified what are the 5 key themes that this building really, really needs to deliver and address. And then we worked to convert those themes into KPIs and then track them through every REBA stage to make sure that it's very well embedded. So the benefit of this approach really is, because you worked with the client and then you worked with their requirements, sustainability really gets embedded into every design decision that you make. It's not an add-on. And that's why it doesn't get weed out at later stages as well. So this is another example in Manchester. It's slightly different because we're working with a client who has a very clear set of themes and KPIs, but the discussion was more about what is the best approach to deliver a certain KPI. For instance, they were really focused on the EUI, the energy use intensity of the buildings, but the question was, is passive house the right approach? Do we want to go through the certification, or we just need to embed that in our methodology? So those kind of discussions really sort of shaped the design here. And then also, once we had identified that it was not just one site, it was applying that in like 5 different sites, which sort of increases the pressure on the team as well to get things right. And the last example on Discover, this is a project that we worked, or feasibility study that we did with LLDC. So this is like another sort of an approach where the client had very, very clear themes and the KPIs and the design guides all set for us to sort of apply to the projects. But the key challenge was, how do you actually apply that in a quantifiable way when you have 3 or 4 schemes, and identify the opportunity for improvement where you could push the boundaries. So we sort of tried to bring all of those together and then created a matrix where you can just, in a quantifiable way, see if the outdoor comfort is better in one scheme versus the other, what's the energy use consumption of one in one scheme or the other. And that helped them to identify what was the right scheme for that site. Then once the brief is clear, or the brief is set, its next step is to explore, like I mentioned, and then this is also like a list of analysis that you could go through in collaboration with different consultants. But every tool and every analysis has its own place, and it should be used in a certain way to get answers. Like the first one at Hawkins Brown, we always start by understanding the climate. So it's really important to see what the current patterns are, what the current trends are, and how it's going to change in the future, because your building needs to address that, because you're building for not now, but also for tomorrow. And then I would say spend some time and try to understand your site. And here what we have done really is used a very, very simple tool, just a very simple sunlight hours analysis, and it sort of indicates if the orientation of your building is right or not, what could be the best entry point for your building, where could be the best place to actually place, say, the external spaces. And then when you look at the building itself, the building block itself, it sort of gives you clues of which areas are shaded, what should be the glazing ratio of it. And again, as a designer, it's very, very important, or a consultant, that at this stage, you lock in those glazing ratios right in. So your later stage analysis actually helps you design a better performing building. And then once that basic principle is set, you could get into the second layer of detail. Here what we have done is we've used solar radiation analysis to then look at every single facade level by level and see what the surrounding is doing to the windows, how they should be designed, what should be the thermal performance of it. And then that also linked with the daylight analysis. And this is also an opportunity for you to sort of strike a balance between the solar axis and the daylight. It's also kind of analysis that architects absolutely love, because it's like a graphical representation of which spaces are working really well, and then they can use it as a design guide and for the internal programming as well. So along with the passive design principles, it's also important to pay attention to the materiality. Like, what are the local low carbon materials that are available around your site? In this case, we went and spoke to the local quarry and see if we could procure those the stone material for this project. And then it's also important to sort of look at the embodied carbon picture, because carbon is really, really important. What we're using right now out of the budget is going to affect the temperatures. How we build our buildings has a huge impact on this. So we look at not just one material, but we look at different systems. We look at facades, we look at substructure, superstructure, and what it is doing to the whole carbon budget and how we can actually minimize it. It's also important to just not look at the upfront, but the whole life stages of the carbon, and I can maybe explain that a little bit more in the QA. And then last, to wrap up the explore part, it's really important to pay attention to the energy as well. So usually in the brief, client is always focused to comply with the compliance requirements, with the Part L requirements, but there's a huge performance gap between how the compliance work versus how the actual building is going to be working. So it's really important to sort of have a discussion with the client, make sure the right kind of analysis, in this case TM54, is actually part of the scope, and someone is doing that analysis, and it speaks to the MEP systems, it speaks to the facade, it speaks to what's happening within the building, because that's the only way you could actually close the performance gap when it comes to energy. And lastly, once you have a solution which works on many aspects, it's really important to sort of safeguard it and make sure that it's delivered through construction, and that's what the delivery part is. So this is another project in Cambridge. It's a master plan where we focused both on master plan and individual buildings. It was really exciting because we ended up working with a whole range of consultants to make sure that all the different KPIs and the sustainability vision of the client was actually delivered through construction. They got the building they actually wanted. For which we then we made sure that there were the different themes that were actually important for master plan scale and building scale were covered. The targets were clear. The roles and responsibility of the consultants were super clear. So, no one could just point fingers at that was someone else's job, or that was, left out because it was not our responsibility. And then towards the end, at the end of stage 4, we also created sort of a dashboard. This is going to be a live document, very super simple Excel sheet, where actually the client can keep an eye on once the project is under construction, if there has been any changes to any of the targets that were set at early stage. So this becomes like a very powerful tool to have a communication between the contractor and the client to spot if there were any deviations from their vision in general. So that wraps up the delivery aspect. Just coming back to the question that I sort of raised in the beginning about, is there any opportunity for us left to be a good incestor? Well, at Hawkins Brown, we believe we still have the opportunity. We can still be good incestors. But the important thing is that you need to design the vision and make sure you're able to deliver it, and you find ways to deliver it. And that's all from me.
Thank you very much.
Well done.
Right. So now's your opportunity to ask anything about anything that's been said today. We've been saving up some questions as the talk's been going on. Anybody want to make a start? No pressure. You first? Sorry, you were seconds ahead.
So I noticed a few of your projects that you mentioned at the beginning followed a off-site production approach. I wondered if you could give a bit of an overview of why you came to that and what led you to that decision.
Sure. I think, it's a trend in the industry, and it's a really good way, we think, of doing a number of things. You generally get better quality. You have components that are made in the factory rather than lashed together on site. There's some really big safety and sustainability benefits from manufacturing in a factory. The waste is much lower. You can be manufacturing elements of a building in a controlled environment. Building sites are still fairly unsafe. Still one of from a kind of workplace death perspective, I think it is still the worst industry in the UK. So there's a lot of benefits to it, and I think there are really interesting opportunities around new materials that come from doing stuff off-site as well. And there's actually also a speed benefit to our clients on site. So I didn't do it today, but we've got some buildings which are more than 70% manufactured off-site. And there are really dramatic improvements in the programme, the pace of construction on site. You can see that in things like the Freeman's Pool, the structure going up in 8 days is amazing. Actually, the little school building was also similarly quick. So again, constructing, in that case, all of the walls, all of the roofs off-site in basically lorry-sized elements and bringing it to site. It's the way to go. We are doing some off-site in the volumetric space as well, which is where, if you think of a porter cabin, that's basically it. But we've got interesting projects where this similar technology is being used to deliver quite complicated, quite interesting buildings. But again, really, really quick. And in the case of the volumetric stuff like that, it's also, you can use it second-hand. So we've got a project down in Canada Water for British Land, which is a lab and actually a university building. It is made out of essentially its porter cabin technology, and I think something like 80% of the porter cabins that are there have been previously used. So from a circular economy perspective, it's a really great opportunity. And I think some people think it's really limiting creatively, but it's not. Not if you're creative about how you use it.
I was going to ask the follow-on question is, if those are the benefits, are there challenges? There must be challenges because the amount of off-site manufacturing, I mean, it's not sort of everywhere, is it?
No. So
it's
there
the
are
exception
some
rather than the norm.
Yes.
Even now.
And you can find there are limitations on what you'd want to do. So certain contractors have got certain technologies that they're very keen on, and so you can find yourselves being pushed in directions which maybe aren't necessarily the right answer for a project. There is a capacity issue in the industry.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a fundamental limitation on the size of components, obviously, so that you've got to all fit onto a lorry, and they've got to be liftable into position on buildings. So it's not always the right answer.
Does it cost more?
Depends who you ask. I think.
Well, I was asking you.
I think it certainly isn't cheaper.
No.
So
Not yet. You think it
not
would
yet.
be, wouldn't you?
So the Canada Water example was no cheaper. So second-hand, I mean, they are basically porter cabins, but some of them have been ripped around a bit to do what we wanted to do. But second-hand, relatively simple components like that you'd think would be cheaper than building from scratch. It wasn't. It will become cheaper.
Yeah.
I think in time.
Yeah. So it's a direction of travel, probably.
It's definitely a direction of travel.
Yeah.
And ultimately, I suspect there'll be more standardisation. At the moment, the stuff we're doing, it's pretty much all bespoke designed, manufactured off-site. I think what will happen is more and more components will be standardised and off-the-shelf components that you then use in a building.
I want to know what's the criteria when you choose the standard for building, like why BREEAM and WELL, why not LEED and WELL?
Why not LEED and what's the other one?
Well,
For the project,
right.
I saw BREEAM and WELL, so I want to know what's the criteria when you choose the standard for each project?
I think it goes back to what the project is trying to achieve and what each of the certification actually provides. So when you look at BREEAM, it's more of an holistic certification, which is also very process driven. It doesn't sort of force you to achieve a certain, say, target. For example, Matter 1, which is the embodied carbon target in BREEAM, it only gives you points to sort of do the exercise. Whether you have made a huge amount of improvement or not is not really focusing on that. But then it covers energy, water, etc. So a large scale. And BREEAM, in a way, because it's been really old in the industry in the UK, it's quite established, has made its way through planning process as well. So often you end up seeing BREEAM is the first choice of the client because it's aware, it's linked with planning, people know what it stands for. Well is something when client is focused more on the health and well-being of the occupant, because that's where it drives. It doesn't really care much about energy. So your building might be consuming hell amount of energy, or they might have like really high ventilation rates. It focuses on health and well-being. So it's really about what the brief is and what the right choice is for the building. What we try not to do is to do lots of certification on a building, because that's a bit unnecessary.
And expensive can be.
Yeah, it can be very expensive. And LEED is something, I think it also touches upon the similar aspects like BREEAM, but it's more recognized in the States, in the US, and that's why it just usually gets sort of filtered out.
They can be very frustrating. BREEAM can be very frustrating.
Yes.
It's very, they do become very process driven,
Very tick boxy.
very
Yes.
tick boxy, and you end up making bad decisions, forced to make bad decisions in order to achieve a certain level of certification under whatever it might be, BREEAM or whatever, and that's frustrating. But they having said that, there are some real benefits. I think it's raised the bar for many clients that probably wouldn't have otherwise done it. The fact that it is embedded into planning policy in lots of areas is useful. It forces clients to deliver buildings which are generally better than they would otherwise have been. But yeah, there causes some frustration as well.
Yeah. The two favorite aspects of mine is the energy and water. It really pushes you to reduce your water consumption, and also, in a way, try to design a very energy efficient building in a certain way. But apart from that, you really have to see, not led by BREEAM too much as well.
Any other questions? Far away.
Can the delivery ever be as good as the design?
That's a very good question.
Yes.
And
And how do you
if
achieve
it
it?
can't be, what would your practice see as solutions to that problem, and how you could overcome that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think yes, there are great examples. I mean, the school project in delivery has exceeded the standards that were set for it in brief. The Beecroft building, not so much on the environmental side, but on the technical performance of those labs, is doing better than the benchmarks that were set for it at design stage. So yes is the answer to, in some cases. There are obvious challenges, and a lot of our projects, as from where you start to where you finish, the budget, money, is a really fundamental challenge for us, and quite a lot of, you have to fight incredibly hard to keep what we consider to be really important elements of a building's design in the project from beginning to end. And I've used two examples where we've exceeded performance criteria, but equally there are frustrations on those projects and all projects where you haven't done everything you want to do. That's a kind of holistic architectural answer. I don't know if you want to say anything, Shikha, more on the sustainability side.
I think we're trying to be better at it. One thing that I learned on Project Newton was you have to bring contractor along the journey. They need to sort of buy in why you're doing what you're doing. And in this case, I mean, this project will be in construction for like next couple of months. But we got involved with contractor early stage 4. And then all the imported carbon targets we had set, or the energy credits, or the landscape, the BNG, and the waste and everything, we actually included them in every sustainability workshop to sort of go through, this is what we're trying to achieve. Where do you think from a contractor's point of view, you see the challenges, and let's try and find a solution to that. So I feel like if you set a nice process and you bring people along and give them a platform to discuss what the issues are and not sort of put it under the rug, I feel like there are better chances of you sort of delivering a building that the client actually needs and how you envisioned it. I'll let you know once the building is built.
I had persuasion as one of my 5 lessons. One of them was persuasion at one point and communication.
Yes.
I took it out, but it is, because I can't remember what I subbed it out for, but it is a really important component. Persuading people to do the right thing
Yes.
is difficult, and that does require good communication skills. It requires, you've got to be trying to persuade them to, you've got a good argument for doing why you're doing things as well. So, you know, when a client is making financial choices, which is usually what it comes down to, you've got to be able to persuade them to have really compelling arguments of why you are suggesting whatever it might be within the design that you're trying to hold on to.
I'm intrigued as to why you asked the question. Is there any, have you been let down somewhere in projects or what?
No, but I think there's just such a big gap between designers in the office and the actual delivery of projects. And I think it's been a lecture a couple of days or weeks ago where we were talking, or where we've been told about issues that, and there was like one specific issue where the air handling units weren't set up correctly, and the BMS people in the building were just saying, oh, this is all terrible, it has been value engineered, nothing is working. And yeah, what can you do as a designer when the people that set up the air handling unit make a mistake?
Yeah. From an MEP point of view, I would say that it is challenging to deliver what you want, what you wanted to set out to deliver. But I would say that probably in my experience, 90% of the projects I worked on actually worked. And there's always exceptions to that, but it's about being diligent, it's about being communicative, and as Shikha said, it's about bringing everybody along the journey. So, and it's about, I mean, it might seem really mad to you, but in a project that is, say, 4 years from design to completion, the critical part from a services point of view is turning it all on for the first time, right at the very end, and making sure that air handling unit does do the 10 jobs that it's supposed to be doing, or whatever it is. It's not uncommon for contractors to convince a client who desperately wants to get the building open for the start of an academic year, for example, that instead of taking 6 weeks to commission that building, you do it in 2 weeks. And, surprisingly enough, the consequence of that is that not everything gets picked up. But I would say there is a process called a snag, the sort of snagging process. So when the building is handed over and there are certain things that don't work, as long as they're not sort of critical things like life safety or whatever, then a building is generally handed over with a few things to do, which can be several thousand in certain larger projects. They get worked through in sort of 4 or 5 weeks after. So maybe the Marshgate one is something like that. I don't know the detail of that. Very good question. Sorry.
Follow up on that conversation. So, for example, soft landings or those type of things. Are Hawkins Brown kind of involved in post-delivery sort of evaluation and stuff?
Good question, Nishash. Good question.
And alternate and a parallel thing is, how much role do you think bringing in targets, specifically energy-related targets within the contracts of delivery by the contractor or something? How much role do you think they can play, and have you had experiences for those?
I'll answer. Yeah, 2 good questions. I think EOE, Oliver could tell maybe more about what's happened.
EOE is post-occupation evaluation.
Yes. Yeah. We've been involved in a few projects, I would say, not every project.
I think most. I mean, the plan of work, RBA plan of work has stage 7, which is in use, and all of our fees have, for most, 95% of our projects have got allocation of resource for at least the first year of occupation. I think there are projects where it has gone beyond that, but that probably is the exception rather than the rule. But I think most design teams now will have some kind of run-on into the occupation of the building of at least a year. Certainly on the MEP side, yes, because a whole 12 months of building use, you need to see how it performs throughout the whole year. I mean, interestingly, and I think really I'm often not very positive about the ROBA, but the ROBA awards have recently been changed so that you have to demonstrate a whole year's worth of carbon and building performance data in order to be able to submit for ROBA awards. So that's a good move, and anybody who wants to put their buildings for awards is having to go through that process. So
10 years behind Subsidy.
10 years behind Subsidy, yeah.
And I can answer your second question, where you said about targets being part of the contractual document. Yes, we've started doing that quite a lot actually now on our projects. What we do is we don't put a figure to it. We don't say you have to, for example, achieve 560 kg CO2 of upfront carbon, because that puts everybody off, and with the changing market and with the changing cost of the materials and construction, it's high risk. But what we do is we put a range, and then we make it an obligation that the contractor has to sort of report their targets. And if they're exceeding it, they need to explain to the client why they're exceeding it. That way you have a window of opportunity to sort of review and assess that, is this the right way to take it forward? At least there's a conversation, there's transparency. It's not just all hidden and nobody's keeping a track.
Getting somebody to sign on that line is very, very difficult when you say, okay. Especially like I have had experience when reviewing some of the projects which were delivered in a similar way. And the conversation became, what's the penalty of not doing that? And that falls the target.
Yeah, no, we still are. We're having a discussion about what that penalty is. But the Project Newton that I presented, every target that we have put into is a contractual requirement. So and that's why it was important to bring the contractor early on, so they knew what they were signing up for, and they could highlight if there were issues in achieving any of those. So I think once, again, you bring everyone along, it's more protected, I guess. Yeah.
Does Hawkins Brown allow students to kind of pick up these things as case studies or collaborate on research projects where we can use them? Because these type of things give a lot of valuable lessons.
They do.
Feed it into.
There's still there's not enough of that in the industry, is there?
No, probably not. No.
Sharing your dirty washing as well.
We're very happy to.
REBA award winning buildings.
Yeah.
We will do it anonymized.
Yeah.
Whatever the dirty part, it will be anonymized, and the glorious part will be highlighted.
No, it's fine. I mean, we're presenting Project Newton at Footprint Plus this year, and we had a roundtable discussion with the client and the team to, list down what were the key lessons learned, even for them, like for the next project. We'll be presenting that as well, so we're happy to talk more about it.
Any more questions? I've got a couple of questions to ask if I can.
There is one Ian.
Oh, sorry.
It's a more career-driven question. I'm not sure if that's adequate.
Come along, yes.
So Oliver, you mentioned those 5 lessons.
Yeah.
And then I think as someone who's going to graduate soon, or in a year's time, I'm wondering, or when I apply to internships, let's say, how do I put those 3 things that are sort of driving me? How do I put them across? And then would you say that when you applied to Hawkins Brown or other firms when you graduated, did you bring that across in your application, or did you just get into a company and then once you're in the company you can sort of show what you actually capable of?
I'll start with the end. When I applied to Hawkins Brown, it was a different world, and I was saying to Ian just before the talk, we advertised for a role recently, a junior interior designer role, and we had 800 applications for that role. And I think when I applied to Hawkins Brown, it was probably a handful of people would have applied to the role that I was responding to. But I think it is possible to get across your passion and your interest and your enthusiasm in the way in which you apply for jobs. Absolutely, we get brilliant applications coming to us. I'd say be concise. Be really punchy, make whatever application you're putting in stand out. But it's very easy to talk passionately about what interests you and what drives you. And that's what we want to see as employers. I think it's, it can be quite graphic, quite visual. Some of the applications we get are right out there, and they do stand out and make a really big difference. Tell stories of things you've done. I know you haven't started your careers necessarily, but there's lots of stuff you'll be doing outside of your career which we are still really interested in. So, I mean, I think you can. It's not that hard, I don't think, to think about what an employer is looking at when they receive job applications and how you can make your application stand out. But I say that the thing we're most interested in is people's passion and enthusiasm for the built environment and where they want to take their career, much more so than the results they've got or the qualifications they've picked up along the way. And we want interesting people is the other thing, is outside of the work context. If you've got interesting things that you've been doing in other interests, then put it down, because interesting people are the kind of people we want to employ.
I mean, I know it seems very daunting, the other side of the graduation process, but I think be calm, be concise, but dial up your passion. I mean, that's what somebody who's passionate and can demonstrate that is the person that's going to stand out from the 8,000. And there's an awful lot of people who just tick yes. That's sort of, I mean, they'll get a job somewhere, but I'm not sure they'll get a job at Hawkins Brown or Hawley or whatever. So dial up your passion. That's what I would say.
Your timing's good. I think that we've had a number of years of carnage in the industry, simply put, post-COVID, but I think we're now seeing the market getting much busier in terms of our opportunities for us as employers for projects, and the qualification you're doing is the kind of thing that we want to be employing as well. So I think coming through university now...
Are you on the MEng 4-year course?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I would say that you are absolutely doing the right course to enter the market now. So, I mean,
when you write applications, it doesn't feel like that sometimes, at least.
Yeah, well, not everybody's going to see that. I mean, the industry is a very broad church, so there are some people who don't want to understand that. But the good firms will absolutely definitely see that. And that was a question, linking that to my question I was going to ask you about sustainability. Because if there's anything that would tell you that cross-discipline knowledge is the key, is sustainability. Because as I see it, sustainability, I mean, I was going to ask you the question, who owns sustainability on a project?
I think it's everyone's responsibility. You can't put the pressure on one person. But yes, having said that, you need to have a sustainability champion.
A leader, for want of a better phrase, somebody who leads that process?
But not just in one team. You need to identify these people who lead sustainability agenda from client side, from design side, from consultancy side, because it's a huge responsibility and a lot needs to be done. So once you create that kind of network and partnership and trust, you're able to deliver a better outcome.
Yeah.
So that's what I've been trying to do,
Yeah.
identify from my client side team who's really the one who's curious about sustainability, make sure that they are in the loop.
Yeah.
Then I'm not the only one fighting for it.
Yes, exactly. And I was going to ask a follow-up question, which were two follow-up questions. The first one was, does sustainability always have to add to the budget? Come back to that in a minute. But you mentioned during the discovery stage that it was your responsibility to actively challenge your client to make sure there was nothing that was wrong or that was left off, or that there was a clarity around why they were doing what they were doing. Oliver mentioned as well that the impact of budget, which cost is king even now. So I would probably suggest that you might go into a project and want 120 things, but you can only afford 100. So the challenge is to make each of those 100 things be the right things rather than the wrong things. So that involves a lot of analysis and process and challenge and awareness. And on top of that, you've got this sort of sustainability thing, which almost impacts on all of those 100 things. So that's a real difficult job to do. Would you agree? And what's your do you have any tips on that?
That's very
It's for
good.
both the
To
two
answer your
really.
first question, it doesn't have to be more expensive, does it? So if you take, again, the school example, doing the right thing from a sustainability perspective was the cheaper thing as well.
Yeah.
So not putting in ceilings, not putting in floor finishes, using really, really simple solutions for walls and roofs, etc. So stripping, having less stuff should cost less money and cost less carbon. Not always the case, because the complexity thing comes in and then makes things more complicated than it needs to be. But
Yeah.
in a simple building, the sustainable solution is probably the cheaper solution.
But you and I both know that most projects, you would get to the stage where the quantity surveyor would be saying what the budget is. We'd all have our first design team meeting and we'd set out some sustainability targets, and then the QS would say, well, that's 15% on top of the budget. So what are we going to take out that costs 15% to allow us to have the sustainability thing? Which is bonkers, but
Yeah.
probably that's what happens on the majority of projects. So then it's a question of what do you know, how do you rank the value of all of those things? And it must be very difficult if you've got a client that really doesn't want to do anything other than compliance. And that must happen as well.
It does. I think,
Sorry to be so challenging, but
no, it's an important question to ask, because that's the reputation of sustainability in general that is more expensive, sadly. But it doesn't have to be, like Oliver said. It's doing the right thing at the right place at the right time. For me, I feel it's like the obvious logical design solution. The problem, I think, or the question that we need to ask is the cost consultant, how they are doing their costing and where they're getting those figures up from, and then how realistic that is, and why is sustainability added as a lump sum at the end
yes.
on top of it, where it could be actually very well integrated. For instance, on the second project I presented in Discover, the older master plan. So the client is really keen to have really good indoor air quality, so really concerned about health and well-being. And then we said it doesn't have to be an add-on. You're designing the MEP systems, you're going to put the ventilation plant, and then you would have certain filtration. You already are doing that as a baseline. So in order to achieve a certain level of indoor air quality, you just might have to revamp certain filters. Why does that have to be accounted as additional 10%? And I'm sure there's a bit of duplication as well. So it's just is when we approach the cost in such in pots and in chunks, is where I feel like the issue is with sustainability.
Yeah.
And it needs to be more integrated, because you're doing things by default in many cases,
Yes.
and that doesn't get highlighted. Like, talk about the U values and everything. Now the building regulations is getting so strict that you have to do that as a baseline.
Yeah.
So why is that being
Why is that an extra?
extra? Why? It's a baseline.
Yeah.
Or getting the orientation right, for instance,
Yeah.
is going to solve so many problems. Getting the glazing ratio. Again, going back to Oldham, we are building 3 towers in Manchester, and we ran the first overheating analysis. Because we had the right principles in, it passed the overheating analysis in first go, which is a rarity.
Good.
We have to get the principles right. I hope that answers your question.
I've got a few more. Any other questions from the audience? One at the back?
Thank you. Well, I think on this, I really like the swimming pool idea where you had, but everything looked really clean, and it looks like the MEP design was done from the very early stage. How early was that done, and is it common, or is it something that you had to do? Because, well, we are aware that often they are conducted too late, but that looks like a result of something that was done way in advance.
Yeah, it was done super early, and as I said, in that instance, it was very proactive, and that the right solution emerged very early. Normally on our projects, the MEP design is happening at a fairly early stage. It's often the case that the architects are appointed at sort of feasibility stage ahead of the rest of the team, but at that point we're establishing the scope of a project, not getting into any kind of detail in terms of how any servicing might work. So for a very integrated building, and most of the ones we presented are, then yeah, we're working very closely with engineers from the outset, and it's the best way of doing it because you get the right outcomes.
I would say, in my experience, that is absolutely the norm. I mean, I would say even 99% of our projects do that. It's interesting though, when I joined the industry in 1984, the architect was king in the construction industry, and it would be not that uncommon for an architect to have done his drawings up to Reba Stage 5 and then consulted the plumbing engineer, as he was then, to try and make it all work. So things have got an awful lot better, and it's by far and away the norm to work together as a team from day one, which is the best way to do it. I was going to ask what makes, it might be interesting for the audience to understand that, I mean, you alluded to it as well, that not all of the projects you work on are successful in terms of how you define what success means in a project. But what is the magic ingredient, do you think, that makes for a successful project as opposed to a less successful project?
Don't know. I mean, it's always different, I think, isn't it?
Are there any common factors?
Well, there's a human level to this, which is the kind of enjoyment you get from working on a project, and as you said at the beginning, we're friends more than we are colleagues, and I think that the team spirit and the camaraderie and the collaborations you have on projects can be really, really rewarding, ignoring what might have got built alongside that. So I think, we mustn't forget that's a really, really important part of the process. I think where projects are less successful, they probably haven't had a particularly clear goal at the beginning. And if you haven't got a really clear goal you're driving towards, then that can be quite difficult. So sort of poorly briefed, poorly thought through things at the very beginning of projects are often not successful. I think where you've got a really passionate client makes a huge difference. We're fortunate most of our projects have had really great clients, but that's not always the case. I mean, some of the sectors we work in are a bit more challenging in that regard. I'd say the residential sector is more challenging in that regard.
Yeah.
You haven't got house builders are not the most aspirational group. They're in it for the buck, and that's probably where we see the most challenges in terms of. I mean, certainly all the kind of sustainability targets and goals we're talking about. That sector is where the challenges sit, and it's the biggest sector as well. So it's it's where the biggest gains should be able to be made.
Yeah.
And I think then the ones that the projects that go wrong in the where they end up in conflict are it does happen. It's there's lots of money on the table, isn't there? And it's quite easy to make mistakes. And we've all made them. Hawkins Brown are being sued at any one time on 5 or 6 projects. That is, none of them, in most cases, that's not our fault, but it's just, and we'll win, obviously. But, I mean, not always. Obviously you make mistakes. Clearly you're going to make mistakes. And we are working in a litigious industry. So, our insurances cost us a lot of money, hundreds of thousands of pounds a year. And
because in any one project you make hundreds of thousands of decisions.
Yeah.
And by law of percentages, if you get 0.01% wrong, that's still 26.
Yeah.
If one of those is the story-to-story height, then it can be quite challenging.
Yeah, it certainly can.
Yeah. My mantra is that I just sort of discovered fairly late in my career. I was doing some judging for British Council for Officers Awards. We used to go around and see all these different buildings. And after several years, I realised that the single thing that created a good project, i.e. an award-winning project or a successful project like that, was a client. If you have a really good client, as you say, who's passionate about what they want to do and is absolutely clear about how he's going to get there, that enthusiasm and passion filters through to his designers. And as Oliver's inferring, construction is all about people. It's all about people. And if the passion can get put through to the designers, and then to the contractors, then you get some great outcomes. The best project I've ever worked on in terms of seeing that in reality was another project for Oxford, which wasn't one of Oliver's, and it had exposed concrete soffits, so that was the cooling element of it, lots of thermal mass in the concrete. And the people who were putting the shuttering up, because concrete is poured, you make a timber shutter, and then you pour your concrete on it, and that sets, and when it's set, you take the shuttering away, and the quality of the shuttering is what determines the quality of the exposed soffit. And the people, the steel fabric, the steel reinforcement crew that were standing on top of the shuttering, putting the reinforcing bars into all the bits of structure in this, which would be covered in concrete, they were stepping on the shuttering, and they realised, without being told, they realised that the quality of the finished concrete was going to be so important to the client, because he engaged with everybody in the construction site to pass on that enthusiasm. They went out and bought themselves some overshoes to make sure that when they were stepping on the shuttering, they didn't leave their footprints, which would then be cast in the concrete forever. And I think that's a really, really good example of where enthusiasm and passion can be infectious. And if you get that bit right, you get a great product.
One question, more career related for the thing. So it's more from, like, if somebody wants to kind of get on to become a sustainability designer or having role at Hawkins Brown, what skills gap do you see from the applicants which these guys can focus on in respective of the fields that would make them more employable when they actually go into the industry? Like key skills can say, okay, these universities don't teach them this. Come on, I'll be up to that. So we can try and see what we can incorporate.
Just remember, all this is being recorded.
Well, we have just recruited a sustainability designer,
Yes.
and obviously we have chosen one person above others. So what were the gaps? Why did we choose that person and not the others?
Well, there are two ways that I feel personally work, and then what we actually look in the candidates really is, and also I think it also depends on what the team actually at the moment needs, right? So it's finding the right fit, it's finding the right candidate. Is one, a specialist. So for instance, somebody could be absolutely brilliant, say for example in embodied carbon, or a generalist, somebody who understands different aspects, and they both have their own place. So for instance, the person that we hired for a lead position was somebody who can actually talk about all the different aspects, because at that position you should be able to talk about these different factors with your client and guide them. Whereas a specialist, when you bring them to solve a problem, they can always bring all the knowledge and their passion and the nth granular detail that they're aware of. So I feel like they both have their place in the industry, and you can't replace one with each other, because we hired two people and one is actually a specialist and one is more like a generalist. But what's really, really important is, apart from the technical skill, it's important to show your passion and how you actually could work with a team. Because you might not be the strongest person in terms of technical aspect. If you have a problem-solving attitude, if you're happy to work with the team, it gets picked up. And that's something that we definitely focus on, because we want somebody who can work with the team collectively and find solutions. So it's a combination of those. Something to work on.
Any other questions before we wrap up? I've got one final one to challenge you.
Here we go.
To challenge you all, really. Do you think your practice, or the industry as a whole, is equipped to deal with the 2050 UK net zero carbon target?
I'll let you answer that.
Well, I mean, I think I personally think we have the answers.
As in the technical answers?
Yeah, we have the technical answers.
Absolutely, I would agree with that.
We have the talent, we have the solutions, but it gets lost in translation somehow. And I think we need to very quickly just get out of these, this making sustainability a bit woolly, and come to like very clear approach and solution and strategies that, okay, this is what we want to do. Net zero 2050 is what we need to achieve. What we need to do is make sure our buildings are efficient, make sure the materials that we use have low embodied carbon aspects, and then act on it. I still feel like even now we're getting better at talking about things, but we're not doing the work, and I think that's where the issue is.
Yeah.
And we also need to be very transparent about it. I think we're not being transparent as an industry.
As in the level of progress we're making.
Yes.
Yes.
And celebrate your failures because it's going to be useful
Yes.
for the next
Yeah.
one. So it's just, yeah, those things. But I think we have the answers.
I asked James Ford, who was at Leeds Hawley, the last, how many buildings Hawley have completed which are net zero carbon. And he sort of scratched his head a little bit and thought, and he said, well, the honest answer is I don't know. All I can guess is it's not very many. And I think that's sadly the case. So I don't know how many buildings there are in the UK, probably over 20 million, 25 million, something like that. I get a lot of those are small houses, but there's quite a lot of buildings that all need to be net zero carbon in 25 years. And I fear that the pace of our industry and the honesty of our industry is such that that is an enormous challenge which you lot will have to deal with. And you know, if there's anything that says you're in the right place at the right time in terms of what you're doing and the career you can have, it's that, because that is an enormous challenge that nobody really has got to grips with. Yeah, the prize is enormous, and I'm 100% confident we'll get there, because we will, because we're very good at doing that. But the scale of uplift in all of the disciplines, design, client, funding, contracting, installing, post-operation, FM, all that is enormous. So you're in the right place at the right time. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much for coming. And I know that Oliver and Shikha put quite a lot of effort into getting the slides together and delivering the talk. So, and they're doing all that for free, other than a chocolate bar, which I'm going to give them at the end. So I'd like you all, in kind of thank them for their efforts. Thank you very much.